Hey, welcome to Hope Rescue Podcast. We're Tim and Kimberly.
Hi.
Hi, that's very close. we're snuggling here for a moment.
Yes.
We were, the last week we talked about fear and kind of didn't get into how fear impacts our life. And we're going to actually do that next time. We're going to talk about how to get rid of fear. Mm-hmm. So I want to do another episode on Hope Rescue Podcast on, how it impacts our life and how it affects our relationships and maybe even our ability to pursue goals and in your work and your leadership, parenting and so forth. So we're going to kind of unpack that next time. So don't miss that next week on Hope Rescue Podcast. But I wanted to talk about fear and how it impacts our life and how we can get rid of fear by an exercise that I've developed. And I don't think I'm the first person to develop this kind of exercise, but it's something that I think it really works for me, and I hope it does for you. So
before we jump into that, can I just mention we're in part 3 of our Breathe series, and just want to talk about that. This comes from the book that you wrote called Breathe. In fact, we have it right here. And it is Overcoming Anxiety, Depression, and Negative Emotions. You can get that at hoperescue.org. I've been really excited about how many people have been buying this book.
And I tell people, hey, we will pay for the shipping. So you buy the book, we'll pay for the shipping, and hopefully God will use it in your life to bring about some healing in your emotional
I wanted to cut
life.
You off, though, because you always forget to plug your own book.
I don't. I'm not a plugger. I'm a plotter, not a plugger. I just wanted to share my journey with fear as a child. I had a lot of fear as a kid, and it bothered me that I had fear, and it seemed like my brothers didn't. Mm-hmm. Actually, it didn't even seem like my sister did.
Maybe they were fakers.
Maybe they were fakers, but my younger brother, Phil, well, I'll give you an example. I was afraid of the dark, but my younger brother, who had to go to bed before me because he was younger, and probably 30 minutes before, my parents really did that whole thing where, this
depending
person
on
gets
the
this.
age, right?
Yeah.
Right. Because they knew you'd play forever if you went in there all at once.
Right. Well, you guys were
stacked up in bunk beds.
Yeah, we were in bunk
I know
beds.
the drill.
So he'd go to bed and he'd have the light off. Mm-hmm. Well, I was afraid of the dark. Oh. So, what do I do? He was bigger than me, even though he was younger, and I was a little afraid of him. So I didn't want to turn the light on. So now I got a dilemma. But it bothered me that the dark didn't bother him.
Yes.
And then it made me feel whatever. But I really struggled with fear of the dark. And I was telling my grandson the other day that even when I was his age, he's 16, our oldest grandchild is 16, and I was telling him that I was afraid of the dark up until I was 16. And the way I overcame it was I realized, of course, intellectually, I knew there was nothing to be afraid of. But my dad pastored this church in Jackson, Wyoming at the 4-H club. Oh. And for some reason, the way the electrician that put the light switches in there, the light switches were at the doors, which were on one end of the building, but you'd go in the top level and you had to go down these steps underground to go into the basement. But nobody ever went into the basement. You go at the top level, and then you would go to the back of the 4-H building, to go downstairs. So nobody ever went downstairs. But the electrician put the light switches right at the opening of downstairs and upstairs.
And we know what dwells in the basement.
Yeah, well, so I get down there, so I have to turn off the lights. My parents are gone. All the people have gone from the evening service. It's dark outside, which happened about 2:00 in the afternoon in Jackson. It seemed like anyway. It's so far north. But anyway, it got dark early, and I would be down there, and I would turn that light switch off. You couldn't go out that door. There was no way to go out. So you had to go through a dark basement, which had a center hallway, and then you'd go up the steps, and finally, when you get halfway up the steps at that landing, you could start seeing the light. Until then, it was just pitch dark down there, no windows. And I did that every week and just ran. I was so afraid. I'm embarrassed to say that,
a lot of people relate.
Yeah, but
we were all kids once.
But one day, I got to that light switch, and I was so tired of being afraid that I decided I would turn it off and stay down there as long as I could.
Oh.
And I just sat down there, and I literally was shaking. I was so afraid.
Wow.
And a little bit in tears.
Wow.
16 years old.
Wow.
And, had a girlfriend, never let her know, but I sure had her walk me home after in the dark. Anyway, so I sat there as long as I could, which actually I got over the fear.
Yeah.
And from then on, I could turn off the light and, casually walk back to the steps and so forth. But sometimes you have to confront that fear. But how do you deal with fear on a really powerful level? And I want to share that with you. But living with fear is, if you live with fear over time, it will create a heart of anxiety. And it may be on a psychological level. Anxiety might be what Kimberly mentioned out of Paul writing to Timothy. He's not given us the spirit of fear. I'm not sure that that's a direct correlation, but that spirit of fear is a spiritual and emotional stronghold in your life.
It's a good way to put it, stronghold.
Yeah. And if you've ever had it, it just is overwhelming. Yeah. So how do we deal with this anxiety? How do we deal with this fear? Anxiety, I always call it anxiety. In fact, I write it in the book. Anxiety is fear run amok. It is gone rogue.
Yep.
And it is just out of control. When fear begins to dominate your life, that's when I think it becomes anxiety. Anxiety is when fear permeates the soul. So it's not just a fear about something, but it begins to permeate the soul. Who was it? FDR, I think he said, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
That's good.
And Franklin Delano Roosevelt, we could have feared the New Deal, but we didn't. Anyway, a little political jab for
most of
those
your
who
audience
get it.
got lost right there, but anyway,
some
unless you're a
people-
history buff.
If you got it, then
You're winning.
You know what's up. Anyway.
But fear, I like the way you put it. You said fear last week is the matrix of all negative emotions.
Yeah.
And fear has been around since the beginning of time, and it entered in the Garden of Eden. Once there was sin that, the Adam and Eve sinned against God, that's when fear entered
Is
into
their first negative emotion?
First negative emotion. So after that, it's basically like it's part of just living in a fallen world, is that we're going to be dealing with fear, and if we don't deal with it properly, it steals the vitality of our life.
Yeah, somebody said to me, well, guilt is a primary emotion and shame is a secondary emotion. And I'm like, okay, I get what you're saying, because you will never have shame without guilt.
Yeah.
The truth of the matter is you can have shame without real guilt.
Right.
Shame is when other people see you. But let me tell you something. In the Garden of Eden, they had fear, and the fear drove their shame. So they were wanting to hide, and they wanted to be away from each other and from God. It affected their relationship spiritually with God and with each other, of course, emotionally, psychologically, and even sexually. That's why they covered themselves.
Right.
So that fear was the matrix. It was it's where all of those negative, whether you have bitterness, whether you have malice, whether you have hatred and anger, those negative emotions all are sourced in fear. So yeah, I do believe that's the first negative emotion.
So I love it in Breathe 90, which is a program you've developed in the process of publishing now to go with the book. There's a test that you put together for people to take in regards to fear. Some questions to ask yourself.
Yeah, some people don't think they have fear,
Right.
and so I give a little test to see if you got it.
Yeah, I can't imagine ever feeling completely fearless in life, but
Well-
there are those that I think don't actually identify or recognize that this is connected to fear. It's a
or
byproduct.
that fear is a problem.
Right.
So a lot of people think, well, I have fear, but I overcome my fear, so I'm okay. And that is good. You know, courage is not fearlessness. Courage is overcoming the fear.
Right.
of threat.
Right.
And when you have courage, you go the extra mile. You go into the fire to grab that child.
Right.
You support your buddy on the battlefield
Right.
and protect him, even though you may be risking your life.
Right.
And that's courage, or standing up for somebody that's being abused in society, the least of these, and you stand up for the least of these. That's courage.
Right.
So it's fear. What I want us to see is we all have fear, but how do we know when fear is a problem?
Right. So
here's
this is a
test.
litmus test. Yeah. So I'm going to read through these. The first would be, and contemplate this as I'm reading them. I spend much of my time thinking about the future.
So a lot of people think, well, if I think about the future, I'm planning and go, well, that's
Which
great.
is a healthy version.
Yeah. But if you are focused on the future,
Obsessing.
but even like you say, well, my life is going to be great when, that is a problem right
Yeah.
there. If you say my life is going to be great, when I was a kid, I go, oh man, I things will be great when I get married or
Yeah.
when I have kids. Or
Right.
I didn't realize just the opposite. No.
Well, the point is you reach those goals and then you're still trying to find the next thing in the
'Cause
future.
nothing ever
Right.
truly satisfies.
Right.
But when you're thinking about the future, and you do need to think about the future, but when you're obsessing about it and you spend a lot of time thinking
Right.
about it, you're putting yourself in danger of fear.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. And the next one goes hand in hand with that. It's, I am not satisfied with what I have presently. So there again, you're not locking into the present. Your anxiety is reaching into the future, and you're obsessed with what's coming.
Yeah.
Instead of being content.
Yeah, I at my age, people my age typically look back and compare their life today with the life,
Yeah,
Tim
the good
today
old
versus
days.
Tim to the past. And I think about, some of the physical skills that I had or like people to think I had. And and the skills I have now are not the same. My dexterity, my ability to move quickly
Babe,
and
you're
so
still
forth.
a stud.
I know. I'm very, very dexterous.
Agile. You can rock a walker like nobody's business.
Hey, you need it, you got it. And so, but a lot of people who live in the future are not thankful for what they have today.
Yeah.
And for us, we lived in probably the best house either one of us has lived in, the house we built together.
Right, our
on the
last
other side of
2
town.
homes ago, yeah. Mhm.
And we live in a house now. We are very grateful for
So
our
thankful.
house,
Mhm.
and actually probably enjoy it more
More.
because we downsized. And I've always thought, what if we have to downsize to a condominium or something like
Yeah.
that? What's that going to be like? And the thing about it is, it will be great. We will
Yeah.
love it then because we
Yeah.
love what we have.
Well,
and
what's happened is in this transformation you've gone through with even writing the book Breathe, because it took years to finish that project. We went through a lot of stuff and we started recognizing what was really important. And you primarily led in this, in because of your temperament, you were always looking to the next thing. And my daddy was that way too.
Yeah.
Always
Very goal-oriented.
Yeah, very always shooting for the next big
Achiever.
thing. And you're a visionary, and that's a God-given leadership trait. However, it can be toxic if you are not able to be present and celebrate and enjoy what God has done today.
Okay, let me share with our audience what you did for me, and it was the first time I probably heard it, but it's the first time it resonated with me. When you hear something and you don't have in your soul the handles, it's like trying to hang up a coat and there's no hangers. There's no hooks for it.
Yeah.
And I didn't have the hooks for this, but I needed this information when Kimberly gave it to me, and that was, I'm looking to the future and with goals and achievement in mind. And she said, Tim, one of the things you're struggling with is your inability to celebrate what was just accomplished. And it so resonated with me. You see, if you're goal-oriented and you're an achiever, like some of us are, I am, and you don't learn to take this next step and then celebrate that next step when it's accomplished, what happened today? I love writing, and when I write, I go, wow, okay, I got to write this book. It's going to be, Breathe is 90,000 words, but it's a little bit longer than most. And, maybe 45,000, 50,000 words. It's when you think about it, it's a lot,
Yeah.
10 chapters, whatever it is. And yet, if you just write a little bit every day,
Yeah.
you've got an achievement. Here's where fear comes in. Fear is, I can't do it. It's not going to happen. Being in the moment is a powerful thing.
Yes.
The world has this thing called mindfulness, and that does work. But if you want spiritual mindfulness, is you're going to be in the moment with God and with God, what God has provided. So that's called thankfulness.
Yeah,
So,
that's good. Gratitude. The next thing in the list is the success of others makes me jealous. Ooh, red flag.
yeah, if you're a jealous person, you're a fearful person. Your fear is driving that jealousy, and so
Fear
if
of
you have jealousy,
inadequacy, fear of
less than, fear of being less than. And, we live in a Western culture where everything is being more than. And, being equal to is really powerful. It is really powerful to go, I'm equal to, I'm not greater than. So what's the next one?
That's good. I become defensive when people criticize me.
Yeah, that is, if you can't take criticism, first of all, you're not going to grow in your leadership and your emotional development and so forth. And I'll admit, I struggle with this, and many people do, but I can tell you for sure that you have a fear problem if
Right.
you do.
I will qualify that I think that it's a natural human nature thing to be defensive when someone's critical. I think if it's in a healthy way communicated to you criticism and you still instantly defend, then that's a red flag to say I need to take a deeper look at this to see if it's fear.
So these are the list of things to know. Let's drop down to the last three.
Okay.
Say.
I see myself as a victim.
That if you are a victim, you are living in fear. Say, no, I'm a victim. I'm not in fear. No, you are in fear. Victimization is when you are your soul is being terrorized by someone who may not even be in your life anymore.
Right. And has
And
no idea
usually
that they're
not.
doing it.
Yeah, and they don't care.
Yeah.
And your ability to extricate yourself from that, and we will talk about that, and we do talk about how to deal with your past, extricate yourself from your past, and it's a very important part of your emotional stability and overcoming negative emotions. What's the next one?
And then these kind of connect together, the last two. I feel unsafe in this world, and I feel unsafe in my thoughts.
So think about people that I know that are fearful and people that have negative emotions, depression, anxiety, panic attacks. They are people that feel most unsafe in their mind.
Yes.
And secondarily, they feel unsafe in their world, in the world around them. Not necessarily the whole world, but in their world, they don't feel safe. And some people feel so unsafe that they develop agoraphobia, where they can't go out into crowds or be around people. They stay in their home, or they're afraid to let go of possessions and develop a hoarding addiction.
A lot of psychological connections
Yeah.
that, there's a lot of, I don't know, I don't want to use labels, but that are rooted in fear.
Oh,
Fear of loss of control.
Yes,
That
absolutely.
play out.
Alcoholism, a drug addiction, sexual.
Well, there goes the
promiscuity.
labels.
Well, that's not so much a label as it is.
Yeah.
The reality is your addiction is driven by fear, and fear of living in the moment, fear of being in the moment, fear of being with the people in your world, fear of dealing with the issues in your life. So if the fear is driving that need to get an anesthetic.
Right.
And that could be done through sex or shopping too much.
Doesn't matter.
Amazon
Fill
is
in
going
the
to be
blank.
delivering right now.
Fill in the blank.
So what we wanted to do to kind of switch gears about overcoming fear. And I want to spend the next few moments in dealing with that because I think it's so important. How can we minimize the fear in our life? You cannot remove fear. That's part of the human experience. One day, when we're in heaven, we won't have any more fear. But here's three things that you have to do. Number one, you have to identify what the fear is, where it's coming from, what are the triggers and so forth. Second, you must take the fear to its logical conclusion.
Yeah, I like that one.
And number 3, you must replace lies with truth. So you've got to take that truth and overcome the lies with that truth. And so let me kind of break that down in just a few moments that we have, and we'll kind of interact as we go through this. You must identify the fear. Most fear is based on unknowns. So we're afraid of something we don't even acknowledge, like fear of living in our world, or fear of intimacy. Many couples we've dealt with, they have fear of intimacy, and it affects their sex life. It affects their communication. It affects their sharing of their finances. It affects the way they raise their children. And so, that fear is driving all kinds of problems. Do you acknowledge what that fear is? And it takes through a lens of reality. Now, most people that are struggling are self-deceived. And I don't mean that as an accusation against you, but I can tell you in my own world, it says this in Galatians 6, you who are spiritual, verse 1 says, you who are spiritual, when you see a brother that's taken in a fault, he's overcome by a fault, you who are spiritual, restore that brother in a spirit of meekness. But you need to consider yourself lest you fall. And it's not that you're going to fall into his sin, but what's going to happen is you're going to personalize his behavior, and you're going to lose the meekness. The meekness means unaffected. But the reason I bring that up, the very next verse says that we are to carry other people's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ.
Yeah.
And he explains what that burden is. It's a heavy burden, unmanageable, one that a person thinks they are something when they are not.
So I was just going to say
they're
the opposite
self-deceived.
of meekness is pride, which is what happens when you're in the position of, that's why you have to guard your own heart in that process.
Well, let me refine that a little bit. So the opposite of meekness is personalization. So and I've done this with you and you've done it with me, where you do something and then I feel threatened by it, so I personalize your behavior.
Oh, gotcha.
And then, so that's not being meek.
Yeah.
So when I'm unaffected, I go, okay, which you've been really good at that. Like when I'm not being
Meek?
the best, no, when I'm
The
not
most
being
meek?
the best person, and you go, okay, I'll let you be who you are right now, and I'll be back later.
We'll circle
And
back.
We'll circle back when you're not being an idiot, or whatever word you used at the time. But anyway, but the thing about it is, we've laughed about that
Yes.
so many times. But that's kind of meekness. So meekness is unaffected, whereas the opposite of that is personalizing people's behavior. The opposite of pride is humility.
That's right.
So humility is I need to hear what I need to change in my life. And I need help seeing that. And that's the second person in that chapter, which I didn't mention, but the person with pride is a person that says, I'm good the way I am.
Yeah.
Well, I see a problem, and it's in the context of going to someone who's taken in a fault.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is that when people don't understand, who they are, and that they have these flaws, they're living life and maybe just recklessly hurting other people as well as themselves. So what I do is I have people write down their top 5 fears and discuss with their group. It's always helpful in a group discussion, especially as people who are beginning to know you. But if you write down your top 5 fears, it will begin to reveal to you what you're afraid of.
Yeah, that's good.
The second thing is write down 5 things that define you. And I don't mean things like, I'm wealthy,
Yeah.
or what defines you. For example, I'm a good father. I am a man committed to the Word of God. I'm loving and kind.
Hardworking.
Hardworking. So what defines you? And you say, well, why would you go from fears to what defines you? Because the next thing, and I want to get to this, is it's so important, is that you take fear to its logical conclusion. So you take those 5 fears, and then you ask this question: how much of a threat is this fear to me? So I've taken these 5 fears. How much of a threat is this fear to me? I'm afraid I'm going to lose my home.
Yeah.
Well, are you really going to lose your home? Maybe you are. If it's a really high, I have marked circle 5. It's a great threat, or not much of a threat. Number 1. Okay. So if it's a low threat and you're living in fear of it,
Yeah.
it helps us to really get a grip on that.
Yeah.
Okay. The second one: what is the worst case scenario if this fear came true?
Would you have another home?
Yeah.
For example,
Maybe not as nice.
Would it be? Yeah, but would you have a place to call home, whether it's an apartment or whatever? We've done this as a couple.
We did,
Yeah.
and as
Couple
a family.
times.
So
Yeah.
we, in 2008, we remember well, 2008,
crash.
the
Yeah.
housing crash. And we were great there for a while, but in that economic crisis, I lost some income, and our house mortgage didn't go down, which was our biggest thing we had to pay for. And I began to realize, hey, we had not fallen behind. I had not missed one payment, and but our house, we were underwater because of
upside
that.
down, yeah,
we
with
were
the
upside
market.
down, yeah. And that crash really affected us. And the market crashed, and we had a lot of money. We were highly leveraged in the market, and lost some money. And we're like, I'm beginning to panic. I really didn't need to panic, but I was. And here's what I was panicked about. I was afraid my wife, and this is all in my head, my wife is going to be disappointed if we don't have this house. So I didn't say anything to her. I just lived in fear. And it was gripping me.
Yeah.
And then I told her, and she said, I'll be fine. As long as we're together, I'm fine wherever we go. And she actually meant it. I could see she was being sincere, because some people say that, and after you move, they're like, this is horrible.
And to give some context to that, I had moved like 32 times up till marrying you in my life, in my home growing up, and in my first marriage. That was a very common denominator. And so I knew that home was where your family is, not necessarily a building. So, but you had told yourself a story, and that I would.
Yeah, that you were going to reject that notion
Right.
and not respect me or whatever.
Right.
Probably that was the greatest thing. And then after talking to her, I thought, well, the kids are going to reject this and, be very disappointed. So I finally got the courage. We sat down with the kids and said, hey, we may have to sell our house. And they're like, well, where would we move? And we said, well, we'd probably go here or there. And we gave some options. It doesn't matter where. And they said, wow, that'd be fun.
Yeah.
I'm like, wait a minute. You guys have this house we built for you.
Yeah.
Anyway, it turned out that we kept the house while they were growing. We only had one left in our home when we moved. And it was not a big deal.
No.
The fear that I had was
unreasonable.
It was unreasonable. But here's the key to making this work. What is the likelihood of this worst case scenario happening? And it was, let me give you the worst case scenario. My kids are going to reject me. That's very unlikely. My wife's going to reject me. That's the worst. Not getting rid of the house. Getting rid of the house was not the worst case scenario.
Right.
The worst case scenario that I came up with in my fear will be homeless.
Yeah.
Like what?
It wasn't even reasonable.
I have a job.
Yeah.
I have a job. We'll not be homeless. If we lived in an apartment, when we were building our house, we had to live in a house, and the kids were all piled into one room on the floor on mattresses. They were all touching each other and had a blast.
Yeah.
And I'm like, why am I afraid? I shouldn't be afraid. Anyway, all of that to say that these threats are not as strong. And if you'll take things to their worst case scenario, you'll find out things are not as bad as you think.
Right,
and
that's
your
good.
fear will subside. You will learn that
Great
you can live with
practice.
this.
Yeah.
So join us next week, because we're going to talk about the impact on our lives, how fear impacts our lives, and how we can dislodge that. Hope Rescue podcast.org. If you want to buy this book, hoperescuepodcast.org. God bless. We'll see you next week.
Bye, guys.